Hey everybody, I'm Lori Rudiman and welcome to the Rise of HXM, Human Experience Management. I'm joined today by my wonderful co-hosts, Minda Hartz and Lars Schmidt, and joined by a special guest, Hung Lee. So I want to get started today because we are talking about how to recruit and retain top talent using the tools, techniques, and philosophy of HXM. So Hung, we'll get started with you. How you doing? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing great. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm excited to have a chat with you guys.
Well, I'm excited to have you here now. You're not based in the States. Why don't you tell everybody where you're based?
Sure, I'm based in London in the UK. So yeah, that's where I am, and dialing in sort of late afternoon. It's a sunny day here, so it's a nice, beautiful way to end the week.
Well, we're glad to have you here. Now, listen, we are interested in your take on all things talent. You are a talent expert, and I want to get started by asking you maybe a bit of a provocative, controversial question. Do you believe the war for talent is a thing? And if you do, does it still exist?
You know, the cool thing would be to say it was never a thing. It was just a marketing ploy made up by McKinsey in the 1980s or whatever. But I actually do think there was a very competitive moment where we were aggressively going for that elite talent and oftentimes destabilizing other companies, targeting competitors, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's not an inaccurate way to describe that period as a war for talent. I think it is still there for certain small numbers of companies where the experience of those people is so unique that there's a limited number of individuals that have that skill set. Limited number of employers that would give them that experience, and you would compete for them. So, for instance, you're looking to recruit a DevOps person that can operate a massively scalable system. Of course, you're going to try and get someone from Amazon. Of course, you're going to go for that type of business. In banking, you're looking for a trader. Of course, you're going to go for someone working front desk at JPM or something like that. So the reality is, yeah, it's cool. But yeah, at certain segments of the population, certain segments of the economy, should I say, the competition for talent could be described as a war. It probably doesn't make sense for anybody else to think of it in those terms, though.
Great, I appreciate that perspective. And Lars, I know we've been around long enough to use this phrase over and over and over again. So what's your hot take on the war for talent?
I mean, I honestly, I've always hated the term. I just have. I get what Hung is saying. I totally get it, but I think it is, you could throw McKinsey under the bus for creating it. But the reality is it's not, we get obsessed with these analogies like war for this and it's a battle for this. It's not a war. We're competing for talent. It's highly competitive markets. They're still highly competitive markets. If you're looking for that DevOps engineer, if you're looking for a computer scientist, a machine learning engineer, so is everybody else, and you're going to be competing for them. But I worry sometimes when we get hung up on phrases like, war for talent, it makes this notion that we're all in competition with each other and it's all zero sum. And I get the actual act of hiring an individual is zero sum. They're going to pick one employer, but the broader impact I think is a little damaging to the industry when we look holistically at recruiting as a war for talent, as if there's no room to collaborate and cooperate and share ideas. And I'm an open source guy. That offends my open source sensibilities. So I never use that phrase. I've never liked it. I still don't. It is highly competitive. I'll give you that. I wish we had a phrase that, we could latch onto that wasn't involving, war or this notion of a battle.
Well, this is why we're friends. And I have to say, I've been waiting all day to ask Minda this question. Minda, I got to get your take on this. Is there a war for talent? Is that the right phrase? Go.
Yeah. I'm glad you asked that question, Lori. I lean toward the similar sentiment as Lars. I believe that's a myth, in my opinion. I don't think there is a war for talent. What I do think there is a war on is where we're finding talent. Because if you're only going to the same places to recruit the same talent, then yes, you're only going to get a certain percentage of people that you've been looking for. So for example, this week, we heard from the Wells Fargo CEO saying that, he can't find any Black talent, right, to fill the pipeline. And that's not true, right? To say that there's no Black talent that can fill the executive suite. It depends on where they're looking. And so I think too, we really have to focus as far as companies are concerned. You can't go to the same pool and expect a different wave, right? You have to recruit in different places. And so what would it look like to recruit at a historically Black university that focuses on engineering, right? What would it look like to partner with headhunters that focus on, diverse talent? So I think that there is no war, but it's a war if you're only searching in the same like petri dish, right? You're funneling to the same places. So that's my take on it.
Well, I love that you mentioned that. And I love that you use the word petri dish, because there's something certainly toxic about this conversation. And we talk about recruitment as if it stands separate from training and development. And if there's just this way that we do it, where we use these tools and technologies and we're searching for keywords like it's 1997 and we go, oh, we can't find a keyword on our platform, so we can't find that person. Hung, I wonder if we're making any advances, or if you're optimistic about tools and technologies really helping us break through and recruit in a different way in 2021 and beyond.
I'm optimistic, but you've got to take optimism with pessimism at the same time. And that may actually just be a recurring motif of the era, right? As one good thing happens, you realize there's all these kind of unexpected consequences that come from that. I think there are certainly better ways to find out whether someone can do the job other than their self-reported CV or resume. When you think about what that document is, it is a bunch of words on a document that someone has written and sent forward. And that's what we're using to effectively match someone to a job opportunity, which, by the way, we have our own kind of a bunch of words on a document, a job description, and we match against that. So you could look at it as basically two sides of the marketplace, introducing really unvalidated data and then trying to get a match between those two sets of bits of data. And of course, it's very problematic and we don't actually get it right. So there is great technology out there. There's great psychometric testing tools. There's great game-based assessment tools. There's a lot of different ways in which the proxies of what a person does can be are getting better, getting closer to the job at hand, I would say. So yes, the answer is that. Although having said all of it, the only way to really know whether the person is going to be suitable for the job is actually to see them do it, a real world assessment ideally, or a work trial or something of that type. And we're starting to see companies experiment with that. Now, that isn't actually a technological solution. That's just changing the idea behind what is it a hard barrier between someone who is not an employee and someone who is an employee. I think if we kind of make that barrier a bit more permeable, then we're going to start seeing a lot more people that, to Minda's point, that may not look like the stereotypical thing that this business might have traditionally recruited for. You'd find them actually get through and succeed because you actually see them in action and performing. So I would say a philosophical change is more exciting for me than the technology side of it.
Really interesting. Lars, what's your take on this? I mean, you're kind of a cool tools kind of dude. You're a nerd for technology. So what's the answer here?
Yeah, I think that I think Hung nailed it, right? If you look at how recruiting happens today and hiring happens today, it's the same way we did it 20 years ago, but we're using digital tools instead of faxed resumes, right? And newspaper adverts. It's still, a human creating a job spec, a human creating a resume, humans, gauging the alignment between those things that are, full of bias in terms of how they interpret the fit. And then you have a hiring manager who's under pressure to make that hire yesterday. So they're just looking for fully baked candidates who've seen and done everything they need that person to do in that role, not necessarily considering whether that's the right next step for them. Are they actually beyond that? And so they're making bad hires. I just think there's a lot of, we haven't quite figured out. To me, I'm bullish on the potential of AI. I think we're not there yet. We're years away from being there. Totally. But when you have the ability, and you can look at some of the case studies that have existed from Unilever and other companies, but where, you can use AI and pattern matching to identify things that people have done and traits that they have and how those align with your top performers or people doing that work. It allows you to actually identify candidates that a traditional application process would never help you find, right? Somebody who maybe doesn't have that same job title, didn't go to that same school, didn't go to that, have that same background, who in your kind of human oriented process may never even be considered, who now will be. And to me, I think that drastically expands the candidate pool you can tap into. And I think that's huge potential. That'll, I think, fundamentally change how recruiting happens and how recruiting works. I think we're a few years away from it, but you're starting to see glimpses of that now.
Really interesting. Minda, one of the things that we hope to change with this philosophy behind HXM is to really redistribute the power of human resources and to encourage and empower and enable job seekers, workers, temporary workers, full-time workers, right? It's a shift in the power differential. So I think about the candidate experience throughout this process. For years, we've put a lot of responsibility on hiring managers, technology, right? But what's the role of candidates in this? And what do you think HXM means for the candidate experience?
Yeah, I really like that, Lori, because I think sometimes we talk about the employee experience once they get hired, but what's the potential candidate's experience, right, as they're applying for the position. So I think that this also gives a, as you say, kind of an appetizer to what it's like to work at this company, right? And so I think that it's imperative that companies think about the very touch point, the very first touch point, right? What did they say? First impressions. You have these feelings after a first impression. So as I'm reading the job description, what is it signaling to me? Does it signal an equitable environment? Does it signal that I have a voice when I'm hired in this company? So I think, or, pay transparency even, some of those things. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities for the candidate experience as they go on their potential employee journey. So I'm really excited. And I know that Hung mentioned it earlier, but I'm seeing more of the gamification, right? Because somebody might have, 10 years of sales experience, but they could potentially be a fundraiser as well, right? So having some of that adjacent experience. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here.
Really interesting. Hung, one of the things that I've noticed in my career is that technology hits a peak, it hits an apex, and then it goes out of vogue. And for years, it was candidate experience management software, right? And the result was we've got this software, it tries to give you a good experience as a candidate, but what it does is it spits out a coupon when we reject you or a discount code, and you can go buy merch. So I just wonder, as we see the convergence of these platforms, we've got candidate experience, culture software, employee experience, like all of this is starting to come together. What's the net benefit for the candidate out there? Like, should candidates care, and are we really even listening to them?
I don't think candidates generally care about what we're doing sort of behind the scenes. They're not going to know, and they don't need to know. They just have the experience. And I say they, but there's we as well. We are also job seekers in different sort of contexts. And I think there's probably two ways to look at candidate experience in my view. It's like before you get through the door and after you get through it. I think the before you get through the door is, I just need information. I need to have no ambiguity throughout this process. I need to see the resume black hole, and I don't need to have that. I need to know whether I'm in or out. That type of thing before sort of the verdict has been made on whether I'm suitable or not. We can absolutely automate and absolutely use technology to eliminate those holes that are currently there. So what happens after sort of a kind of a vague yes has been made, like, hey, you're interesting, come through, let's have a chat. Then I think it becomes a lot more human. And that's where I think an organization that cares about candidate experience, it will be able to impress present, if you like, the experience to the candidates according to how they wish to be as a business. And again, you can use tooling to support that as well. But I think those are two quite separate things. Right now, for me, the primary problem is actually before the door, because the predominant reason why people are annoyed at recruiters and annoyed at or find job search stressful. I mean, for the folks listening at this at home, remember the last time you were looking for a job, I assure you, you're not having a good time. This is an unpleasant experience, fundamentally unpleasant experience to do a job search, particularly if it's an involuntary one. High stress, everything, other people judging you, no information coming back, horrible. So I think we need to focus on that. Let's eliminate it. It's low hanging fruit anyway. You can solve it with technology. We need to focus and get this done.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And Lars, I mean, Hung is absolutely right. Looking for a job stinks, right? It's terrible.
Huh.
So I wonder, if companies really believe in the promise of HXM and are investing in technologies, can they even let this experience continue to suck? You would think no, right? So I wonder what they could do to really go above and beyond to show a commitment and to attract and really be worthy of that talent that's out there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things. I think, for one, be, open with candidates about the process, right? I think the biggest question is, every company has a different interview process, a different timeline, different review process. A candidate doesn't know any of that. And I think Hung's right. A candidate doesn't need to know everything that happens behind the scenes, but they want to know, I just submitted my resume. What happens next?
Sure.
When will I hear back? Do you have parsing software? Is a hiring manager going to review my resume, or is a recruiter? Will I be considered for other roles if I'm not considered for this role? It's just all of that ambiguity that happens in every single time you apply for a job. You can take that away very easily with, even something as low tech as an auto response in the receipt of the application that has embedded FAQs in it. We know the questions candidates are typically going to have. Here are the answers right away before you even have to ask them. That simple move right there, I think, is a huge step in actually helping alleviate some of the stress and pain and frustration. I think on the technology side, there's lots of ATSs now that actually allow you, they have like an application login portal for candidates, and you can see where your application is in process in real time.
Yeah.
So while that capability exists, I think the challenge is the recruiters have to be using that, right? And so recruiters, they may not enable it because they don't want to provide that transparency, or they're slow to move candidates through that process, and because they don't want to reject them right away. They feel like, oh, it'll be better to leave them hanging for a week and then reject them. No, it's not. Give them closure. If you know they're not a fit, let them know they're not a fit. Help them however you can. So I think that there's a variety of ways that recruiters can help offset that and bring a little more humanity to their process that's both tech-driven and just, the right thing to do driven.
It's so interesting that you talk about the role of technology, because we ordered burritos last night for dinner, right? And we had them delivered. And the whole time I'm like, where's my burrito? Where's my burrito? And if I'm not frustrated about my burrito, think about how you would be if you were looking for a job, right? But we've had this kind of theme going on that recruiters and human resources professionals tend to forget what it's like to be a job seeker, right? And we default to the systems of our companies instead of really thinking about the true human experience. And then suddenly we make a hire and we act as if we're doing someone a favor sometimes, and we bring them on board as an employee. And then there's a whole different set of systems that they have to go through, a whole different rigmarole. And I wonder, Minda, if you could maybe speak to this a little bit about some of the best practices with employee experience. Like, for example, we know right away the first 90 days are the most important 90 days of any person's career, right? So talk to me a little bit about where your head's at with employee experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is where people can really lean into HXM, because once you get in the door, you've made it, right? You've gone through hoops, dodge fireballs, all of the things. You're there, but
you get your T-shirt, right? You get your company T-shirt and all your swag. You're thrilled.
You get your water bottle. Like all these great things that have occurred. I think the important part, though, is I love where the onboarding, you have an opportunity, to the point as everyone else spoke of, is that transparency, right? Here's what's happening the first week. Here's what could happen in week 3, right? Here's who you're meeting with and why you're meeting with them, not just where the bathroom is and where the break room is, right? But really understanding what encompasses the next 90 days. But not only that, Lori, I think it's also important to use these tools for performance management, right? So as you're embedded in your work for the next 90 days, am I meeting requirements, right? Am I meeting expectations, and understanding what that looks like, so that by the end of 90 days, you don't receive like some pink slip, right? But you're understood what this experience was and what you're adding value to the company. Yes, if you are, if you aren't. So I think it's really important to use those tools to help create a better experience for everybody.
Well, that's really well said. And Lars, I want to pivot to you for a second, because part of the employee experience is feeling like your company cares, right? And having processes and systems to show that they do care. And never has that been more important than during COVID-19. And we've seen a real convergence between emotions, right? Systems, processes, and technology. So can you talk about the role of tech during COVID-19 and maybe some things that are leaving you a little optimistic right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, COVID has, upended, I think, most people teams structures in terms of how they support employees. And technology is a great enabler of how they can actually do that. I mean, whether it's comms tools, whether it's platforms to bring people together, whether it's creating support for additional support and communities for your parents within your organization, people who have elder care, your single employees who are, desperate for connection. I've seen a lot of creative uses where companies are actually creating different platforms. It could be, groups in Slack. It could be different types of technology platforms that will actually allow people to come together. And I think it's also, as you look at this from an employee experience standpoint, some companies are actually really stepping up. There was an example of a company in London that I had worked with that right at the beginning of this, they sent their employees home. They said, okay, you can work from home. They said, your job is secure through the end of the year. Nobody's going to lose your job. We're going to be open. You can, when it's safe to open, you can come back in the office. You can work there as long as you want. You will never have to come back into an office. And if your spouse has been laid off or furloughed, we're going to give you an extra $1,000 a paycheck to help you offset that financial hardship. And so, I think it's ways that companies are looking at both creating technology to support these new distributed hubs that they have of their employees, but then also, understanding and appreciating the emotional, toll of everything that's happening and finding ways to support that as well.
Yeah, really good stuff. Hung, I think about us on this panel having an American perspective on COVID, but you're a resident. I mean, you're in London. We can't call you European anymore, but you're our resident, spokesperson for all of Europe, right? Let's just say that. So tell us your perspective on what's happening over there in terms of the employee experience and COVID-19.
Well, I think it's really interesting to look at regional variance here, because there's no question that the role, one of the things that COVID-19 has reminded us of is how important the role of the state is over the wide sweep of things. One of the things I think the UK's done tons of things wrong, and the things that they've done right have been suboptimal, I would even say. However, I think they've also been they've rolled out policies which I think are really impressive, providing pay for supporting employers to keep people employed, persisting that over time. France, Germany, even more so. I think Germany have said that, hey, listen, they're going to keep paying wages for the next 18 months or something. Yeah. And that gives companies the confidence, that gives employees the confidence. In Germany, it completely looks like there was no pandemic. Why? State was strong and very confident and very clear about what they were going to do. And they were going to make sure that, this impacts everyone. It makes no sense to throw people out of work. That's going to have a cascade effect that we can't deal with. No money in, no rental payments, collapsing, property prices, everything's going to just go under. You have to keep people in work. You have to keep those jobs. So I think the role of the state, we've been reminded how important that is. It's interesting to see the variance of it. I think the US probably has got probably a tougher scenario, I would say, than anybody in Europe, I'm afraid to say.
Well, I like that you're drawing distinctions between the state, the government, and technology and corporations, like everybody working together. When it's working well, people are working in unison. And I really think there's something to be said. Is that just an overall analogy for the times right now? And Minda, I wonder if you can talk about really the role of corporations working in a healthy way to continue to motivate and engage people during these difficult times. If we take an HXM approach to what's happening in the world right now, how do you think companies can really help to continue to motivate and engage people?
Yeah, that's a simple answer for me is the continuous feedback, right? Allowing people to be able to say, how they're feeling, how is virtual environment, how's that experience been for them? Does Zoom work versus Google Hangout, asking all of the things that's allowing them to be able to do their job. Do they have the internet that they need to be able to function? And, all of those things I think is part of the employee experience. And I think that's why HXM is so important, because it provides everybody at the company can offer some feedback. And I want to see more companies, democratizing communication.
Really well said, really well said. Well, as we start to wrap up the conversation, I want to talk a little bit about recognizing and rewarding good work. I mean, that's really a high key driver for attracting and retaining talent. So Hung, I know this is something you and I have been passionate about in the past. We've talked about it in the past. So can you talk a little bit about the role of recognizing work, and what do you see out there in terms of processes, platforms, attitudes that make you optimistic about where we're headed?
Again, I think the optimism is really at the cultural level. Companies are now recognizing the need for recognition. And in fact, they recognize that people's motivations do include financial compensation, of course, material goods and stuff like that. They're absolutely necessary. But they're not going to make an existing employee super motivated. What we'll do is sort of sense of contribution to the organization. So if they've done something, companies, I think, are starting to recognize that you need to just blow that up. You need to have this, I would say, is not even a policy thing. This needs to be at a cultural level. So the distinction, I would say, between policy and culture is that policy becomes very structural straight away. It's rolled down from the top, firstly, and then people are obligated to kind of deliver on the policy. Where culture is different is that it's simply a description of existing behavior. And what you want to try and do is to have that culture where individuals who see something great just go out and vote and have the sense of freedom to say that. And this goes to Minda's point. You can have if you build the culture correctly, you don't necessarily need to have the policy rolled out from the top down. People need to feel empowered to praise their colleagues, let's say, or to praise their manager, or to praise whoever, and not have to fake it. So yes, there's technology that helps us do that, but it's really just communication tech. It's just and fluency with the use of that, but more so, it's like, can we empower people to do it without making it into a cliche?
Interesting. Well, Lars, one of the things that I'm most excited about when I think of like recognition technology or some of these platforms is the ability to nudge someone, right? To remind them, to say, we know you're busy, we know things are crazy right now, but why don't you say thank you? Or why don't you recognize an employee? And I think now that we're all kind of distributed and remote, that's more important than ever before. What do you think the role of technology is in making sure that we live up to some of our cultural values?
Yeah, I mean, I think nudges and automation can go a long way in helping remind, especially managers, that they need to be checking in on their employees. They need to be checking in on, how they're doing beyond just how they're meeting their work deliverables. I think we're in such a unique time, especially for companies that were, co-located in an office, and now they're remote, and they have managers who've never managed remote. Like, it's a different art to manage remote employees than it is when you can pop into somebody's desk and be like, hey, I really appreciate your effort on that project, or recognize somebody in an all hands meeting. Hey, this person did an outstanding job. You don't have that right now. You're probably not going to have that for a while. So you have to adapt. And I think that, finding ways to leverage technology to, have nudges and reminders for managers who themselves may also be overwhelmed by everything. Yeah. I think that can go a long way in helping maintain that. But to Hung's point as well, it's hard if you didn't have a culture of recognition pre-COVID. It's really hard to build a culture of recognition now. I think if you did, that ports pretty well to distributed. If you didn't, you've got some work to do.
Yeah, boy. Well, that's about as cynical as I've ever heard you be there, Lars. Minda, I want to wrap up our conversation with you today talking about recognition. One of the challenges of a recognition program is to make sure that it's structured in such a way that it's fair and free from bias and recognizes the work of all who really put forth the effort. So do you have some thoughts on recognition and how we can make sure that we're really doing right by our employees to continue to attract, motivate, and retain? What do you got?
Yeah, I probably sound like a broken record, but I really feel like it's the feedback, it's the communication, because if everybody understands, manager and employee, manager and talent, what does success look like? What does good look like? And we're on the same page, or maybe we're not on the same page, right? But I think it's really important that we have these conversations. And I think sometimes employees don't feel empowered to say, you know, actually, I do want that seat at the table, right? Or they might think that, oh, doesn't my manager know everything that I'm doing from, you know, 8 to 5? And maybe that's not clear, right? So I really think it's important for managers and employees to communicate, have that continuous feedback. And to Lars's point, like right now, if you've never managed virtually, then you may just want to like throw the covers over your head, right? So you're not checking in as much, or maybe you're micromanaging too much, you know? So I think that there's so much there. And I think it's just those hard conversations, those courageous conversations. And I think automation helps kind of alleviate some of that tension.
Really interesting. Well, I want to thank all three of you for just being terrific panelists today. Thanks for getting nerdy on me. We have 3 votes against the war for talent, so I'm super proud of that. I'll throw mine as the 4th against that phrase. Hung, thanks for being a guest today.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. Lars and Minda, it was great to see you.
See you again.
Yeah, and
likewise,
everybody.
Lori. Take care, everybody.
Yeah, and everybody, please, you're more than welcome to join us at a wonderful event that's called Success Connect. It's on October 6th, and we'll all be there. We're all going to have a good time with it. We're going to be nerding out about these topics, and you can find out more information in the comments below, a link to register. We would love to see you there. And for everybody on the panel, I'd like to say goodbye, and thanks for joining us for the rise of HXM, Human Experience Management. Bye, everybody.